What if a simple act of patience, a quiet tolerance you assumed went unseen, was actually a trial for Leo Chun, a 26-year-old barista buried in student loans and abandoned plans? Patience was his last remaining virtue. His subject was Edith, a sharp-tongued, frail elderly woman who wheeled into his cafe every afternoon, a storm cloud at a window table. He gave her a patient nod, a perfectly frothed latte, and a sliver of his attention, anticipating no gratitude. He believed she was just another difficult customer. He didn't know she was protecting a mystery valued at millions, a mystery poised to unravel his world. Because one foggy Thursday, the cafe entrance didn't part for Edith. It parted for her executors, accompanied by 3 stern-faced associates. And they had come for him. The chime above the door of the Daily Grind Cafe was the background score to Leo Chun's existence. It wasn't a welcoming ring. It was a worn-out electronic ping that heralded another order for espresso, another milk jug to steam, another coin to maybe land in the tip glass. The cafe itself was a time capsule, a box of scuffed pine tables, the hue of weak tea, a perpetually damp concrete floor, and the everlasting scent of ground coffee beans and steamed milk. For Leo, or Lee, as his friends called him, it was his anchor and his chain. For the past 4 years, 5 days a week, from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., Lee had performed the routine dance of the barista. He moved behind the counter with an efficiency born of necessity, grinding beans, texturing milk to silky perfection, and maintaining a calm demeanor that often felt as thin as the porcelain cups he polished. His real ambition, his degree in environmental science, felt like a souvenir from another life. His spirit was stored in a small studio apartment across the city, languishing beside hiking gear he never used and maps of trails he could no longer afford to visit. His regulars were a familiar ensemble. There was Margot, the relent cheerful yoga instructor, who ordered matcha tea and talked about auras. There were the 3 competitive cyclists who argued about gear ratios over vegan pastries. And then there was Edith. Edith was distinct. She wasn't a regular in the friendly sense. She was a permanent feature, as much a part of the cafe as the faulty espresso machine. Every single afternoon at precisely 3 p.m., she would navigate her motorized wheelchair through the glass door and park at table 7, the one by the front window. She rarely acknowledged anyone. She wore the same ensemble, a crisp lilac cardigan regardless of the season, pressed slacks, and polished flat shoes. Her face was a network of fine lines, her eyes a piercing gray that missed nothing. She was a critique in a cozy space. The first time she arrived, Lee's manager, a constantly anxious woman named Anya, had pulled him aside. Don't engage with the battle axe at 7. She's all complaint. Just make her a dry almond latte with an extra shot. She'll pay with exact change and critique the foam. Raj, the veteran baker who had the warmth of a glacier, had snorted. Energy vampire. Should seat her by the dumpster. But Lee perceived something else in her brittle exterior. He saw a fierce independence, a stubborn pride that resonated with the resilient part of him. So he disregarded Anya's warning. The first day, he placed the latte carefully on her table. Good afternoon. Here's your drink. She simply glared, not speaking. He made the drink anyway. When he brought it over, he noticed her hands, gnarled with arthritis, fumbling slightly with the cup sleeve. The next day, he repeated the process, and the next. For a week, she met his polite service with silent scrutiny. But Lee was unflappable. We got a new almond milk brand today, less bitter, he'd mention. Or, the fog is really rolling in off the river. Then one Wednesday, about 6 weeks into her silent patronage, as he set down her latte, he saw her struggling to remove the tight lid from her travel thermos, her fingers lacking strength. Without fanfare, He picked up the cup. "Let me," he said quietly. He transferred the latte into her thermos and secured the lid. For the first time, Edith looked directly at him. Her sharp gray eyes held his, and for a brief instant, he saw a flash of something surprise, perhaps even relief. She gave a single, curt nod and looked out the window. It was a breakthrough. From that day, it became their custom. He'd prepare her latte, dry with an extra shot. He'd bring it to her, and he would always transfer it to her thermos. Sometimes he'd speak to her, filling the quiet with harmless observations about the weather, a new coffee blend, or his fated dream of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. She never replied, but he sensed she was hearing him. She would sometimes leave a single hard candy on the table, a silent token that felt more significant to him than a large tip dot his coworkers mocked him gently. "Still trying to charm the Ice Queen, Lee?" Raj would taunt, shaping sourdough with a cynical grin. "You're wasting your time. She's probably mute." "Leave him be," Anya would mutter from the cash register. "If he wants to practice his saint act, let him. At least she doesn't yell." Much. Lee didn't mind. Those few minutes every afternoon became a peculiar touchstone in his drifting life. In a world that felt chaotic and indifferent, this small, wordless exchange felt grounded. It was a basic act of service, a moment of quiet respect. He wasn't doing it for a better tip or for approval. He was doing it because when he observed the formidable old woman at table 7, he saw a person who deserved a bit of patience. Even if she couldn't or wouldn't express thanks, he had no clue that his quiet patience was being witnessed, assessed, and measured by an intellect far keener than anyone in the daily grind could possibly fathom. The Thursday dawned murky and damp. The air was heavy with the odor of wet pavement and roasting coffee. Lee was operating on 5 hours of sleep, having spent much of the night reviewing another rejected job application in his field. He felt the familiar weight of futility, but he shrugged it off, fixing his neutral, professional expression as he tied his apron. 3 p.m. arrived and passed. Table 7 stayed empty. Lee checked the clock, then the door, a slight crease forming on his forehead. Edith was never late. Never. She was as punctual as the metro dot by 3:20. A thread of real worry began to weave into his thoughts. Perhaps she was unwell. She was elderly, after all. He decided he might ask the local shopkeepers later if they knew her, though he suspected no one did. She was a fortress dot at 3:45. The door pinged, but it wasn't Edith. The entire cafe quieted. Even the whir of the grinder seemed to pause. 3 women, all with the posture of soldiers and dressed in severe navy suits, stepped inside. They moved with a smooth, coordinated efficiency that was utterly foreign to the casual, slightly messy cafe. One flanked the door, her gaze methodically sweeping the room. The other 2 stepped aside to allow a 4th person to enter. She was older, perhaps in her early 70s, with white hair cut in a severe bob and a face of intelligent severity. She wore a beautifully tailored taupe pantsuit that likely cost more than Lee's monthly rent. In her hand, she held a slender titanium tablet case. She surveyed the cafe, her expression one of analytical curiosity. "Can I help you?" Anya asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her usual edge vanished. The woman in taupe ignored her. Her eyes scanned the room until they settled on Lee, who was standing motionless by the espresso machine, a portafilter in his hand. She walked directly toward him, her low heels making crisp, purposeful sounds on the concrete. "Are you Mr. Leo Chan?" the woman asked. Her voice was cool, precise, and carried an expectation of compliance. Lee's heart thudded against his sternum. He managed a nod, his throat constricted. What was this? Legal trouble? Had he done something wrong? Was it about his loans? The woman stopped before him. She gave him a prolonged, evaluating look. My name is Victoria Thorne. I am the chief executor for the estate of Miss Edith Vance. The name echoed in the sudden silence. Vance. It sounded formidable, important. It took Lee a second to connect it to the stern woman at table 7. Edith. Her name was Edith Vance. Edith, he murmured. Is she all right? She didn't come in today? Miss Thorne's expression softened a fraction. Miss Vance passed away peacefully in her home 2 nights ago. The portafilter suddenly felt like a lead weight in Lee's hand. A surge of unanticipated sorrow washed over him. It was irrational. He hardly knew her. She never spoke to him, but their silent routine had become a part of his life, a small, steadfast moment. Now it was gone. He felt a pang of loss. Oh, he said, his voice quiet. I'm very sorry to hear that. Raj was watching from the bakery counter, his eyebrows raised. Margot had paused mid-sip of her matcha. The entire cafe was hushed, audience to a scene they couldn't comprehend. Miss Thorne gave a brief, acknowledging nod. Miss Vance was a woman of immense specificity. Her final instructions contain a provision that requires your immediate presence. If you would be so kind as to collect your belongings, a car is waiting to take us to my firm for the reading. Lee stared at her, utterly baffled. Her will? Me? I think you have the wrong person. I just made her coffee. There is no error, Mr. Chun, Thorne said, her voice firm, yet not unkind. Ms. Vance was exceedingly clear. Your name is Leo Chun. You are a barista at this establishment. And for the past 11 months, you have transferred her latte into her personal thermos every afternoon, without fail, and without ever being asked. The detail was so specific, so ordinary, that it robbed Lee of speech. She had noticed. Not only noticed, but had informed her executor. Anya, he said, turning to his manager, who looked bewildered. I don't understand. Go, Anya said, finding her voice. Go on. Raj can cover your station. Raj shot Lee a look of pure, stunned curiosity, but didn't object. Numbly, Lee untied his apron, his fingers unsteady. He placed it on the counter, grabbed his old backpack from the staff cupboard, and walked back out. The 3 associates and the executor formed a discreet phalanx around him, creating a surreal island of austere authority in the humble café as they escorted him out, leaving the entire clientele in stunned silence. Lee felt a dizzying disconnect. The cool, misty air hid his face. A sleek, silent electric sedan, a black Genesis, was idling at the curb. One of the associates opened the door for him. As he slid onto the smooth vegan leather seat, a seat more advanced than anything he'd ever owned, he looked back at the daily grind. It looked suddenly fragile under the gray sky. He had a profound, electrifying sensation that he would never see it quite the same way again. The ritual was over. Something new and infinitely more complex had just begun. The ride to the law firm was a silent, disorienting trip across the city. Lee stared out the darkened windows at the passing bridges and buildings, now seeming like a film set. The car was a capsule of hushed efficiency, smelling of clean air and new electronics. Miss Thorne sat across from him, reviewing files on her tablet, her face an impassive mask of duty. Lee's mind churned with confusion and a dull, aching sadness for the old woman he never truly knew. The offices of Thorne and Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek, modern tower in the city's innovation district. It was a universe removed from the daily grind. Soaring atrium spaces, living green walls, and sound-absorbing minimalist decor greeted them. Lee, in his faded chinos and scuffed sneakers, felt like a smudge on a pristine blueprint. He was led into a serene conference room with a wall of glass overlooking the river. At one end of a long white oak table sat two people who looked as incongruous as Lee felt, though for opposite reasons. They exuded an air of aggrieved entitlement. A man was in his early 30s, with artfully tousled hair, a fashion-forward blazer, and a permanent smirk. The woman beside him, presumably his sister, was sleekly dressed, her face a mask of impatient boredom, her foot tapping a silent rhythm on the floor. Ms. Thorne cleared her throat as they entered. "Mr. Julian Vance, Ms. Simone Vance. This is Mr. Leo Chun." Julian Vance's eyes performed a swift, contemptuous inventory of Lee. "This is the urgent matter? A barista? I told you grandmother lost her edge at the end." "Julian, manners," his sister simpered, though her eyes on Lee were just as dismissive. "Really, Victoria, is this necessary?" "Mr. Chun, please sit," Miss Thorne instructed, indicating a chair at the opposite end of the table from the Vances. The distance felt deliberate, a canyon between realities. Lee sat, his hands folded tightly on the cool wood. The associates stood impassively by the door. The tension in the room was palpable. Now that all parties named in the primary codicil are present, "We may proceed," Thorne announced, opening her tablet. She began to read in a clear, emotionless tone. Most of it was legal language Lee didn't follow. Trusts, donations to obscure scientific institutes, bequests to research foundations. He listened to the enormous figures being mentioned, sums that seemed abstract. Then Thorne paused and looked directly at Julian and Simone. "To my grandson, Julian Vance, and my granddaughter, Simone Vance, I leave the distributions from the Vance Family Trust as stipulated in binding prior agreements. This constitutes a sum of $8 million each." Julian let out a derisive snort. "$8 million? That's a slap in the face. The foundation is worth 20 times that. Your grandmother redirected the bulk of the foundation's liquid assets into perpetual charitable trusts over the last 18 months, Thorne stated coolly. Her private fortune was hers to dispose of as she wished. She owed it to us. We're her blood, Simone snapped, her bored facade cracking. Thorne ignored them and continued. All remaining personal assets, intellectual property holdings, and the directorship of the Vance Foundation for Environmental Stewardship are to be dispersed as follows. She swiped her screen. To my colleague and confidant, Dr. Aries Petrova, I leave the sum of $2 million. She turned her attention back to Lee. Lee held his breath. Perhaps Edith had left him a small bequest, $1,000 as a final silent thank you. That would be staggering enough. And now, Thorne said, looking directly at Lee, her voice resonating in the quiet room, we come to the final provision. She read from her tablet. To Mr. Leo Chun, the young man at the daily grind who showed an old woman patience when he had no cause to, who treated her with respect when others saw only a burden, and who, without fail, transferred my latte because he observed my hands could not manage the lid. Lee's eyes stung. She had seen everything. Thorne continued. To Mr. Chun, I leave a legacy of patience rewarded. First, I bequeath to him the sum of $300,000, to be transferred immediately, to grant him the freedom his kindness afforded me in my final years. Lee's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. $300,000. It was an inconceivable amount. It would erase his debt. It would buy him time. It was a miracle. What? Julian exploded, shooting to his feet. She's giving a fortune to a coffee jerk? We'll challenge this. She was clearly manipulated. Please sit down, Mr. Vance, Thorne said, her voice dropping to a glacial calm. I am not finished. Julian glared, but slowly sank back into his chair, his face mottled with anger. Thorne adjusted her glasses and read the final line. And finally, because it was the last place where I was regarded not as a benefactor or a burden, but simply as a person, I leave him the one thing that offered me genuine solace. I bequeath to Mr. Leo Chun, in its entirety, the property and business known as the Daily Grind Cafe, located at the corner of Harbor and 3rd, which I acquired 9 months ago through a blind trust. Silence. A thick, absolute silence filled the conference room. Lee just stared, his mind refusing to compute. The cafe. She bought the cafe. Then Julian started to laugh, a harsh, ugly, incredulous sound. The cafe. She leaves him a hipster coffee hole. After all that drama, she leaves the barista his own broom closet. Grandmother's final joke. But Ms. Thorne wasn't amused. She locked her tablet, set it down, and looked at Lai with an expression he couldn't quite place, a blend of respect, caution, and something like sympathy. "There is one more detail, Mr. Chun," she said, her voice low. "Attached to the cafe's ownership is a small, dedicated environmental impact fund Ms. Vance established to ensure its operations are carbon negative and to finance sustainable upgrades. Its current valuation is approximately $4.5 million. The laughter died in Julian's throat. His face went from flushed to a sickly white. Simone's perfectly glossed lips parted in a silent gasp. Lee felt the world lurch. $4.5 million. The cafe. It wasn't a broom closet. It was a flagship. The sharp, silent old woman whose latte he made wasn't just wealthy. She was Edith Vance, pioneering eco-chemist, founder of a vast philanthropic foundation. And she had just handed him a broke, overqualified barista, the blueprint to a new existence. A life that, judging by the venomous glare in Julian Vance's eyes, was about to become intensely complicated. Leaving the law firm was like exiting a soundproof room into a storm. The associates guided Lee back to the Genesis, a buffer between him and the sputtering, furious threats of Julian Vance, who pursued them into the elevator bank. "This isn't finished, you opportunistic nobody," he hissed. "I'll tie this up in courts for decades. You'll die before you see a cent." Lee said nothing. He was in a state of profound shock, his mind replaying Thorne's words. $4.5 million. The cafe is yours. Ms. Thorne had given him a secure daytastic and a slim folder. "A sustainability consultant will contact you tomorrow, Mr. Chun. Speak to no one, particularly the Vances. If they approach you, contact me immediately." Edith anticipated their response. The car deposited him in front of his modest apartment complex. The juxtaposition was brutal. One moment he was in a realm of minimalist luxury and millions. The next he was climbing the echoing tile stairs to his small studio. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, the folder held tightly. His hiking pack leaned in the corner. His laptop sat on a rickety table, open to job sites. The first thing he did was log into his student loan portal. With trembling fingers, he authorized a payment for the total outstanding balance. The confirmation screen loaded. The relief was so physical, it made him lightheaded. He sat on his floor, not crying, but breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. The next morning, Lee didn't go to the cafe. He couldn't. What was his role now? Instead, he went to a bank with the electronic transfer confirmation for $300,000. The teller, who usually processed his modest deposits with routine indifference, summoned the branch manager, who greeted Lee with newfound cautious deference. By the afternoon, he knew he had to face it. He walked the familiar route to the Daily Grind. It was the mid-afternoon lull. Through the window, he saw Raj boxing pastries and Anya frowning at the till. He pushed the door open. The electronic ping sounded. All movement ceased. Anya looked up from the register. Raj paused, a scone in hand. They had heard. The news from Margot, who had witnessed the executors, had undoubtedly traveled at light speed. "Lee," Anya said, her voice wary. "Hi." Anya, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He walked to the counter. I guess? You know. Heard you hit the jackpot, Raj said, setting the scone down. His tone was guarded, not unkind but edged with disbelief. Too good for the steam wand now? Raj, Anya cautioned. No, it's okay, Lee said. He looked from Anya to Raj, then to the other part-timer peeking from the kitchen. This had been his reality. It's true. Edith, Miss Vance, she left me some money. And she left me the cafe. A unified shock rippled through the small staff. Anya's hand flew to her mouth. She what? I own this lease. I've poured my life into this place for 10 years. Lee's stomach tightened. This was the complication Thorne had mentioned. He opened the folder. According to this, Anya, the building's owner sold the property and business 9 months ago to a trust called EV Holdings. You've been operating as a salaried general manager since then. Anya paled, reading the document. EV Holdings. They offered me a buyout, a generous one. I thought it was some corporate chain consolidating. I never imagined. She sank onto a stool, looking devastated. So, I've been working for her. And now I work for you. The surreal truth settled over everyone. Leo Chun, the quiet barista they'd sometimes covered shifts for, was now the owner. Raj let out a low whistle. Well, plot twist. So what's the first order, boss? Gonna replace us with robots? The challenge hung in the air. This was his first real decision. All eyes were on him. He felt the anxiety, the uncertainty. His old identity was gone. He was management now. Lee took a steadying breath, pushing his own disorientation aside. He thought of Edith, of her unyielding standards. What would she have expected? No one is being replaced, he said, his voice clear. Nothing changes today. Anya, you know this business inside out. Raj, your pastries are what keep people coming back after 11 a.m. This place works because of you. I don't know how to run a cafe. I know how to work in one. I'm going to need you to teach me. His frankness eased some of the immediate tension. Anya looked up, a flicker of her old determination returning. Raj simply nodded slowly, assessing him. So, what's the big idea? Anya asked, the manager in her surfacing. You going to turn it into a juice bar? No, Lee said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. But I am going to finally fix that leaking fridge, upgrade the compost system, and install a proper water filtration unit. It was the perfect response. The kitchen helper chuckled. These were their daily frustrations, the hidden costs of their work. Hearing them addressed by the new owner, their former peer, meant everything. Just then, the door pinged. A courier stood there. Delivery for Leo Chun. He handed Lee a small, reinforced envelope from Thorne and Associates. Puzzled, Lee opened it. Inside was a single modern keycard and a handwritten note on heavy recycled paper. The handwriting was precise, but the lines wavered slightly. It was from Edith.Leo. It began, If you are reading this, then my wishes have been enacted, and you hold my gift. The money is to clear your path. The cafe is to give you a foundation. This key is to show you the direction. It accesses my private laboratory. Victoria knows the location. Go, understand the full scope. A final request. EVA keycard. A secret lab. Lee looked up from the note. The inheritance wasn't just funds and a business. It was a mission. And as he met the watchful eyes of his new employees and recalled Julian Vance's toxic glare, he understood he would need to complete it to fully secure the future. He'd been handed the address Miss Thorne, provided for Edith's private facility, was in an unassuming, repurposed warehouse in the industrial waterfront district. It was a building of weathered brick and large windows, blending with the artist studios and tech incubators around it. When Lee's rideshare pulled up, he felt curiosity, not intimidation. A discreet biometric scanner was beside a reinforced door. Missing. Thorne was waiting. Her expression was grave. "She hasn't permitted anyone here in over 5 years," she explained as the door hissed open. "Not even her foundation board. This was our true workshop." Lee stepped inside and stopped. It was a vast, open space flooded with north light. But it wasn't the scale that stunned him. It was the content. One wall was a living library of rare botanical specimens under specialized lights. Another was a bank of humming, sophisticated servers. Workbenches held delicate chemical apparatus next to 3D printers fabricating plant-based materials. In the center was a pristine hydroponic system growing coffee bean varieties Lee had never seen. It was a hybrid laboratory, garden, and tech hub. She was one of the world's foremost minds in sustainable biomaterials, Thorne said softly. This is where her real genius lived. This is what Julian coveted. The patents and research here are incalculable. The space was intensely orderly, yet it vibrated with latent energy. It felt not lonely, but purposefully isolated, a sanctuary for a singular intellect. "The core server is this way," Thorne said, leading him to an isolated terminal. "She left a private digital dossier for you, accessible only with this keycard and a biometric scan she registered from, well, I believe from observations at the cafe." Lee's hand trembled slightly as he swiped the card and placed his palm on the scanner. It beeped, accepting him. The monitor glowed to life. What appeared was not a simple file, but a complex, interactive model. It was a schematic of the daily grind, but reimagined. Energy flows, zero-waste cycling systems, supply chain maps, tracing coffee beans directly to regenerative farms she funded. It was a blueprint for a truly sustainable, community-integrated cafe, version 2.0. But one window was different. It was a security feed archive. Lee clicked it. It showed a live camera view of the cafe's seating area from 9 months ago. He saw himself patiently transferring Edith's latte. The footage was time-stamped, day after day. Notes popped up alongside in Edith's text. Observes. Doesn't intrude. Efficiency born of consideration, not haste. Frustration with broken equipment, but never with people. She hadn't just been watching him. She had been analyzing him. Then he found a sealed digital folder labeled Advanced Dynamics. Inside was a damning portfolio. Julian's attempts to sell foundation research to a petrochemical conglomerate. Simone's siphoning of grant money into her lifestyle brand. Records of their contempt for Edith's hobbyist environmentalism. One of her notes read, "They see the foundation as a piggy bank. They see the planet as a resource. They have my name, but oppose my life's work." Finally, he found a file simply titled Legacy Pathway. It contained a single documented transfer of a symbolic 1% of the voting shares in the Vance Foundation's Oversight Committee. The attached note read, "Leo, influence is a tool. This minor share grants you a voice at the annual review. Julian will be there. He will move to dissolve the cafe's fund and redirect assets. He thinks you are irrelevant. Demonstrate he is mistaken. All required data is here." EV? Lee looked around the lab at the thriving plants, the advanced tech, the evidence of a life dedicated to solutions. Edith hadn't just given him a cafe. She had given him a proof of concept, a weapon of data, and a cause. The conflict with Julian Vance wasn't just about money. It was about the future of her life's work. And she had just equipped her most improbable ally for the confrontation. The ensuing weeks were a period of rapid evolution for Lee. His days were split. Between the cafe and the lab, Miss Thorne arranged for his secure access. The associates, now discreetly retained by him for security, would drive him after his shifts. At the daily grind, his presence was initially awkward. He tried to resume his barista duties, but Anya and Raj gently stopped him. "You're the owner now, Lee," Anya said firmly one day, taking the milk jug from him. "Your job is to figure out how we implement that," she said, nodding to the preliminary plans for the solar panels and graywater system he'd sketched. "Let us run the daily grind." He retreated to the small office and learned. With the consultant Edith had arranged, he began to understand carbon credits, closed-loop systems, and ethical sourcing. The $4.5 million fund wasn't a cash pile. It was an engine for transformation. He gave everyone a raise, starting with Anya and Raj. Raj, his staunchest skeptic, was the hardest to win over. He watched Lay with a baker's careful eye, waiting for pretense. The pivotal moment came when the ancient, energy-guzzling refrigerator compressor finally failed with a smoky spark. The kitchen descended into chaos. "That's it. I'm done," Raj declared, throwing his apron on a flowery bench. "I can't work in a kitchen without refrigeration." The old Lee might have panicked. The new Lee simply nodded. "You're right. It's unacceptable." He made a call. Within 3 hours, a specialist team was installing a state-of-the-art, hyper-efficient refrigeration system powered by a temporary battery unit. He authorized the premium emergency service without hesitation. The next day, the kitchen was colder and quieter. Raj returned, said nothing, but began leaving a perfect fresh-baked croissant on the office desk every morning. Lee had earned a measure of respect, not with grand speeches, but with decisive, practical action. His nights were spent in another world. In Edith's lab, with Ms. Thorne as his guide, he became a student of legacy. He deciphered her research on mycelium-based packaging and drought-resistant coffee cultivars. He read her personal logs, filled with clinical observations on climate models and sharp, witty dismissals of corporate greenwashing. He learned of Julian's short-sighted schemes and Simone's hollow activism. He discovered Edith's ultimate stratagem. In her final years, she had legally insulated the Foundation's core research from the board, placing it in a perpetual trust. She had converted the majority of her disposable wealth into the cafe's fund and other direct action projects. Julian's inheritance was a calculated pittance. She had deprived her grandson of the capital needed for an easy coup. Julian expected to inherit a throne. Edith had left him a committee seat with limited power. His plan, reconstructed from her files, was straightforward. At the Foundation's annual review, he would motion to reallocate underperforming assets, like the Cafe Fund, to more visible, brand-friendly initiatives run by his contacts. He had the support of a few board members who valued publicity over impact. "He can't commandeer the Foundation," Thorne explained one evening in the lab. "But he can cripple its most innovative projects. He can create enough doubt to stall progress. His pride demands he dismantle what he doesn't understand." "So how do we stop him?" Lee asked, looking at the 1% share certificate on the tablet. It seemed negligible. "We use the weapon Edith left you. Irrefutable evidence," Thorne said. "That share gives you a voice in that room. We cannot outvote a bloc, but we can outshine them." Working late, they crafted a strategy. It was bold, nerve-wracking, and depended entirely on Lee's ability to stand before a room of experts and philanthropists and convince them that a barista understood the founder's vision better than her own heir. The day of the Vance Foundation annual review arrived. Lee stood before the mirror in a borrowed quiet apartment near the warehouse. He wasn't wearing his cafe clothes. A personal shopper arranged by Thorne had provided a simple, well-cut charcoal blazer and trousers. He looked composed, serious. Inside, his nerves were a live wire. "You are prepared," Miss Thorne said from the doorway. She observed him, and he saw a glimmer of approval. Edith saw potential. Now you must realize it. He was driven to a convention center by the river, where the review was held. In the glass-walled atrium, he saw Julian holding court with his clique, radiating smug confidence. Julian spotted him, and his expression morphed from surprise to scornful delight. "Look who's decided to join the adults," he called out. "Come to take notes for the coffee orders?" His sycophants tittered. Lee didn't engage. He met Julian's gaze, his own expression neutral. "I'm a member of the Oversight Committee, Julian. I have a right to be here." He walked past, following Thorne into the main hall, leaving Julian momentarily silent. The review chamber was a theater of influence. A semicircle of tables faced a stage where the Foundation's directors sat. Rows of seats were filled with major donors, scientists, and journalists. Lee, guided by Thorne, took a seat in the front section reserved for committee members. The proceedings began with dry reports and impact metrics. Lee listened intently, his posture still. Then the chair opened the floor for new motions from the Oversight Committee. Julian was immediately on his feet. He was a polished speaker, all easy charm and sweeping rhetoric. He spoke of modernizing the Foundation's image, of leveraging assets for maximum media return. He framed current projects like the Cafe Fund as small-scale, unmeasurable pet projects. "My grandmother was a visionary," he declared, "but vision must evolve. The Vance Foundation needs to think bigger, act bolder, and partner with major players to scale its impact." He then formally proposed his motion to reallocate the capital from the Daily Grind pilot project and similar micro-initiatives into a new global green brand partnership fund. A murmur of interest and concern mixed in the room. Julian's allies on the board voiced support. He had momentum. The Foundation's executive director, a thoughtful woman named Lynn, offered a quiet defense of the small-scale project's deep community integration, but was talked over. "Is there any other comment from the committee before we proceed to a vote?" The chair asked. This was the moment. With a slight nod from Thorne, Lee rose. A wave of whispers swept the audience. "Who is he?" Julian smirked. "The floor is for committee members, not service staff." "I am a committee member," Lee said, speaking into the small microphone at his table. His voice held a slight tremor, then steadied. "My name is Leo Chun." He didn't look at Julian. He addressed the directors, the donors. "Mr. Vance speaks of his grandmother's vision. I am here today because I witnessed Edith Vance's vision in its final, most personal form. Not the vision of press releases, but the vision of daily practice." He told his story, simply, without drama. About the cafe, about the latte, about the thermos. The room, initially skeptical, grew quiet. In her last years, Edith Vance was interested in one thing above all: integrity of action. She wasn't looking for the biggest splash. She was studying the quality of attention, the commitment to a small right thing. He then turned to the data. Mr. Vance talks of unmeasurable projects. Edith Vance left detailed metrics. Thorne activated a display. Lee's voice grew stronger. The Daily Grind project, in its current form, is a blueprint for a hyperlocal, carbon-negative service model. Its research into sustainable packaging, derived from her own lab, he gestured to images from the warehouse, has already yielded 2 patent-pending compostable materials. Its value isn't just in coffee served. It's in a replicable model for reducing urban waste. He faced Julian. Julian Vance speaks of leveraging assets. Edith Vance's private records show his understanding of the Foundation's core assets. Thorne placed files before the directors. Records show his attempts to license Foundation biopolymer research to Synthepetro for greenwashing campaigns. His global brand partnership fund, bears a striking resemblance. A proposal from a marketing firm owned by a major polluter his venture capital fund is invested in. The room erupted in muted shock. Julian's face drained of color. This is a gross mischaracterization. Is it? Lee pressed, his gaze unwavering. The documents are there. Edith Vance didn't redirect funds from these projects out of spite. She did it to protect them from being hollowed out by the very brand-friendly thinking now being proposed. She believed the heart of this foundation was intangible, accountable impact, an idea this motion fundamentally misunderstands. He then played his final card. But I'm not here just to oppose. I'm here to fulfill a specific request from Edith Vance. She didn't want her foundation to simply write checks. She wanted it to incubate proof. Therefore, as a committee member, I propose an amendment that the cafe project be formally adopted as the Foundation's living lab for sustainable urban retail. And I volunteer to serve as its project lead, reporting directly to this committee, to turn Edith Vance's final pilot into a template for the future. It was a brilliant move. He wasn't asking for power over the Foundation. He was offering to shoulder the work of proving its most innovative premise. He had defended the existing director while providing a visionary, actionable path forward that honored Edith's deepest intentions. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Aries Petrova, the respected scientist Edith had left a bequest to, stood. I knew Edith for 40 years, she said, her voice ringing. This is exactly what she would have wanted. Not more talk of brands, a working model. I support Mr. Chun's amendment. One by one, other committee members and major donors voiced agreement. Captivated by the concrete vision and the damning contrast with Julian's hollow proposal, Julian stood utterly isolated, his motion collapsing not from a procedural defeat, but from a moral and intellectual one. He had been outmaneuvered not by a financier, but by a barista armed with truth and a fairness. The vote was a formality. Julian's motion was overwhelmingly rejected. Lee's amendment was adopted. Months later, the daily grind began its transformation. It remained a bustling cafe, but now with solar awnings, a water reclamation system, and packaging grown from mycelium in the back. The original Table 7 was preserved. A small engraved plaque on its surface reading, Edith's observation post. Lee split his time between managing the cafe's evolution, with Anya as his fiercely proud Kuain Raji as his head of sustainable sustenance and leading the Foundation's new Living Lab initiative, which was already attracting city grants. He finally had the mental space to apply his environmental science knowledge, not on a distant trail, but in the heart of his city. He had honored Edith's legacy, and in doing so, had finally constructed his own. Leo's story powerfully illustrates that the most significant legacies are often built not from grand gestures, but from consistent, quiet integrity. A simple act of patience, a moment of respect offered to someone who seems to offer nothing in return, can resonate in ways beyond calculation. Edith Vance possessed immense resources, but she spent her final years seeking something no amount of funding could guarantee: authentic, unassuming decency. She found it in a neighborhood cafe, in the actions of a barista who chose to be patient. Leo didn't just receive a financial windfall. He inherited a responsibility to demonstrate that true progress isn't about scale alone, but about the integrity of the model. His story prompts a question: who are the formidable Ediths in our own circles? And do we have the patience to see past their surface? If this narrative of unexpected purpose and principled resolve resonated with you, please consider leaving a like to help share it. Let us know in the comments what your first step would be with such a legacy. Don't forget to share this story and subscribe for more tailies that remind us the most profound changes often begin with a single, simple choice. Thank you for reading.